Evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second episode of the BigFooty Bombers podcast for 2021. This is the third recording that we've made. We've had a couple of guests come and go in that time, but I am joined still for the third time by the man who created the original BigFooty Bombers podcast, and that is the Prosecutor. How are you this evening?
Mate, I'm doing fantastic, and I think the third time will be the charm here. Just reinvigorate myself, get back into the theme of it, and hopefully we can nail one out here.
So for anyone wondering, the other two candidates that we did have on, we had Jade on Monday night who did record with us, but due to my microphone, which certain former editors of this podcast will laugh when they hear, we had to redo because my microphone wasn't good enough. We then also just had Eth Dog on the second recording. However, due to his microphone, to save Beerfish's ears, we decided to cut him early, restart and jump back. So now it's just Pros and I. So Pros, we'll start with the GWS game. I thought it was a bad game. I'll admit I didn't see it live, but I have seen various replays and highlights and what else since. The hooker incident for me is pretty clear cut. It wasn't a mark. It was definitely a free kick. What's less clear cut is whether he would have kicked it. And I certainly don't know if it cost us the game as much as everybody who's listening to this is probably screaming at me that it did.
Well, I mean, you see it 1,000 times a week, though, where a decision's not paid. And, I mean, yeah, sure, we can have a look at this and isolate the incident with like 50 seconds to go. But the reality is there were so many events that happened within the game that how is it fair just to isolate this one when you can say, well, we conceded 6 goals in a row? Why is that any less to blame than an umpiring debatably error? But I mean, it is what it is in the end, and I don't think in the grand scheme of things this is can be one that we look back on and harbour any real grudges over. So I think we just move on and accept that hopefully we'll be on the other end of the stick one time soon.
Yeah, I think the other problem is, from an Essendon fan point of view, is that it happened in Sydney. And we do feel like we've had the raw end of the stick up there, whether it be against the Giants or the Swans. Gary Rowan throwing Marty Gleeson aside, Dane Rampy who shook the goalpost. Even earlier this year, I certainly was angry with the umpires after the game, although I calmed down afterwards and probably reflected more like on what you've just said, in that plenty of other things happened during the game. So I certainly think the Sydney factor comes into it when decisions like that go against us.
Well, if you haven't seen the early Simpsons episode, Homer versus the City of New York, I highly recommend you watch it because it epitomizes what an Essendon supporter feels about the state of New South Wales. Every time we go there, it just seems like we get rogered in one way or another. And every time we add a few more blisters from where that stick's from being on the wrong end of it. And once again, it's come to fruition on Saturday. But again, hopefully one day soon we'll start to be on the other end of it, and we'll be laughing when it comes to September and we're winning finals in the MCG against these teams.
We'll start with positives. I mean, obviously, the two main positives for the weekend were Darcy Parish and Zach Merritt, again, kept their form going. I think Merritt had 37 disposals, Parish had 35. Then you throw in, of course, a third one in Nick Hind, who had 29 disposals again. They are probably...
I mean, that's just arbitrary. The last few years for us, isn't it, with Nick Hind? We've effectively come out pretty much even when it comes to Hind Facade. And then we've got ourselves Zach Reid there as like a bit of extra pocket change on top of it. It's fantastic.
I'm not sure I'd say that Nick Hind is just as good as Adam Sard yet, although I will just quietly note that Sard had a very forgetful game on the weekend himself. But as he's no longer part of Essendon, he's not the focus of this podcast. The other player that I think was exceptional in the role that he played coming on so late was, of course, Matt Guelphy. 8 touches, a goal, and he did lead the tackle count for the day, which, I mean, I think is a little bit concerning. I think coming on that late, you'd hope that other players would end up having more tackles than him. But having said that, at the same time, he came on, he was fresh, he was like a bull at the gate, so he really was an impact player. So it's probably not as a bigger indictment on the other players as I maybe think it is.
Man, he was like a little pit bull. It's like the one I've got in the back corner of my property that keeps barking at my dogs. Finally, that Guelphy got released, and boy, did he have a good quarter. As you said, 8 touches, led the team for tackles, and was just fantastic, really. And it's one of those quarters that could really be the cornerstone for a good solid amount of form that leads to, going from a fringe player to potentially ending up like, say, Will Snelling, who starts to really sort of cement his role in the team.
Yeah, and I think the comparison between Snelling and Guelphy is pretty apt, to be honest. I think they're fairly similar in their style, and Snelling, for me, since he's been in the side, has been one of those, and this is no disrespect to him, but he's one of those bottom six players that you can probably have if you're going to be competing for a flag, or even to win a final. We'll lower the expectations just a little, because he does come on, he does get his 15 to 20 touches, he can chip in with a goal or two, he does lay his tackles. So if Guelphy's going to become that sort of player, then I don't see anything wrong with that. Not every single player can average 30 disposals a game.
Exactly. In the end, if he can come in, do his role, and that's what we're really about here. I know that I was listening to Alex Rance's podcast with Dylan Buckley the other day, and he spoke about how Truck was really big and Richmond was really big on players being able to come in, have their own individual role, and just be able to come in and play. So if Guelphy can really sort of match that philosophy that Truck has, then he's going to have a real career under Ben Rutten.
The other player, and I'll be honest, I probably didn't notice this until Heath actually mentioned it in the second recording of this podcast, and that's Andrew McGrath did have 12 clearances on Saturday, and he only had 25 disposals. So we're saying that, 50% of the time when he gets the ball, he got a clearance. That's pretty impressive for a bloke that a lot of people say he's out of form. I don't know if he's necessarily out of form. I think he hasn't come on as quickly as Hugh McCluggage has, and I think that people are comparing those two more than they should. But still, 12 clearances is pretty bloody good effort.
Yeah, it really surprised me too, to be honest. I guess the question when it comes to McGrath is if he's best utilising the weapons that he has. I was thinking about this the other day, and in some capacity, he reminds me, not in terms of output, he reminds me of how Chris Judd transitioned from that sort of really agility-based player when he was at West Coast. And then once the OP came on for him, he transitioned into a sort of, slow clearance midfielder and had success doing that. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that with Andrew McGrath, whether by design or just how his career's unfolded, that he's taken that, that agility that he had when we drafted him. And now he's just that little rugged ball nugget that is starting to, I wouldn't say blossom, but he's starting to sort of find his own in the contested space. And hopefully some of those weapons will come back to him.
And the other bloke that I was impressed with on the weekend, and I've been a big fan of his this year, and I'll be honest, the start of the year, I think I may have even said in his thread that I didn't think it was AFL quality, and I had him on the scrap heap, but he's come back with a fury, and that's Mason Redmond. I thought, again, 23 disposals, not horrible by foot or hand. He actually was second to metres gained, only behind Zach Merritt. He kicked a goal himself. He had 3 score involvements. I think he's blossomed now that we don't have the McKennas and the Sards in that back line. I mean, we've still got Hind, but there's also that other slot that sort of floats between the half back line and wing, and I think that's what Redmond's doing now, and I think he's really enjoying that freedom.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, and I think he's another guy alongside the likes of Parrish, and even, I guess, Aaron Francis as well, with Hurley being out of the side. We've really had the opportunity to make a position their own, and we're starting to see the fruits of that as well. And I mean, obviously, he had a down year last year, but he had shown that he was capable of this in previous seasons. So it's really great to see him actually start to deliver that week in, week out. And hopefully we get to see it for a lot more years to come.
Yeah, and I'm now just going to move on to what I think went wrong. And you've heard me make this point. This will be the third time I've made this point to you. So no doubt you have a well-scripted and rehearsed line. But Jade and I did touch on last week that big forwards are getting hold of the Essendon backline just a little bit. Nobody's kicked a massive bag, but we are conceding 3, 4, 5 against the Talls. Finlayson again on the weekend kicked 3. Now that's not a huge bag, but with Laverde, Francis and Ridley in a pinch playing as key positions, our back line is starting to be a worry, which is a little bit interesting because if you'd said that at the start of the year, or if you'd picked an end at the start of the year that we'd be concerned about, I would have said it was the forward line, but that seems to be clicking at the moment.
It's funny that you mention that because, I mean, it's sort of a week-by-week proposition here. The back line, I thought, did pretty well, all things considered, on the weekends. I mean, Finlayson sure kicked a couple of goals, but 3 in the end, I think it was. But there was never any real point where I felt like he was dominating our players, so to speak. Like, I always felt like they were almost, I don't want to call them cheap goals, but it did feel like that more so than, hard-earned goals that came through dominating one of our players. But one thing I did notice on the weekend, actually, and we talked about Saab before, and I thought lacking that sort of small to medium defender would be one of our Achilles' heel this year. And it turns out that Ridley ended up spending over 100 minutes aligned with Toby Green and kept into 2 goals. So I thought that was a little bit of an underrated, but very much a solid performance from Ridley there, and almost like a Dustin Fletcher-esque matchup with Betts all those years ago, or Garlett. So when it comes to key forwards, I think we do have an issue, but in the end, if we can start getting on top of the midfield and limit the supply and ease of which the possessions come in and stop those over the back goals, then, I feel like it's a solid back line and it can perform.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm as complimentary towards Ridley's performances as maybe you are. I mean, yeah, he did only kick the 2 goals, but he did still have the 21 touches and he had 8 score involvements, which is still a considerable effort. It's not the right matchup, really. So it's not a terrible effort, I suppose.
No, and I mean, that's the thing you've got to look at. Like, there's 2 things you need to look at. One, it's the quality of Toby Green. You've got to accept that there's going to be some damage that he presents to you. And if it's 21 goals, 2 disposals, and 8 score involvements, you know what? That's almost a par game for him, if not slightly below par with how he's been performing this year. And then I guess secondly as well is that, you've got to look at, as you say, the matchups that we have for him. And, we're asking Ridley to, for lack of a better way to describe it, outside of his weight class. Obviously he weighs more, but we're asking to a role that he was uncomfortable with and that he was ill-suited for. And he put up the manful effort. So it wasn't the ideal situation on the weekend, but I feel like we battled through and we gave ourselves a chance to win the game.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, a 2-point loss on the road in a game where we flew in and out. Now, people may dismiss that as irrelevant, but they flew in, they landed, they played, they turned around, they came home. It can't be the easiest thing in the world to do. I mean, I personally thought the game was going to be moved to Canberra, and I'm still a little bit bemused it wasn't. But I think that may have more to do with the AFL wanting us to play in New South Wales and Sydney and getting bums on the seats more than player safety and player welfare, but I am a cynical man. The other thing I sort of noticed on the weekend, and this is again switching back to the positive, is Kyle Langford did look like he was starting to get back into form. And I think the point was made on the board earlier in the week that he usually does have a slow start to the season. I mean, we build him up all pre-season. He has a slow start to the season. People jump on and declare he's not the player that we hoped and he's not this and that. And then he plays a few good games in the middle, and then he's excellent towards the end. And then we spend all pre-season hyping him up, and then we roll over and we start all over again. Do you think maybe we're starting to see him come into a little bit of form?
To a degree. It's been really positive that, he put himself in a position to influence the game on the weekend. Now, he kicked 2 late goals, and I think that sort of, fluffed the stats a little bit. But, overall, his field kicking was not to the level that he'd be happy with throughout the game. I think there's still a lot of areas for him to improve. I think we can also put to bed the fact that he's not a midfielder, he's a forward. So hopefully we can actually see him down there a little bit more permanently playing that sort of high half forward role. But, hopefully that sort of last quarter and as those last 2 goals, for instance, really do start to, build the bed for him to have a really successful 2021 season.
One more thing I'll touch on, and it's only mainly about the weekend, and it's only come to my attention because, again, we had a couple of midfielders get away to us to a degree. Especially Josh Kelly, who had 30 touches and kicked 2 goals. Taranto had 29 touches and kicked a goal. And Taranto also had 10 score involvements, and Kelly was pretty similar. Are we ever going to see a tagger played in the Essendon jumper ever again? I mean, Dylan Clark, we all thought was going to be our tagger, and he did that job on Cripps, although, the way Cripps has been lately, he takes some of the shine off Dylan's performance, maybe. But are we going to see a tagger, and should we have played one on the weekend? I mean, there was a lot to choose from. Jade and I discussed last week they have an embarrassment of riches on their list still, GWS. But maybe negating one of them could have helped swing things in our favour.
To be honest, taggers in the AFL is a lot like a teenager trying to pick his haircut. 6 months, he'll think he likes his haircut one way, and then the next thing you know, he's got dreadlocks. And that's very much the same way when it comes to the AFL's philosophy with taggers. One week they're popular and they're sexy. And you see Dylan Clark have a good game on Paddy Cripps last year or Nat Fyfe. And then 3 weeks later it's abandoned. It's not thought of again until, we're at last chance saloon with the player and like, okay, see what you can do as a tagger. And you know what? For Dylan Clark, it's probably the only role that he realistically has available to him. So, if we really want to see if Dylan Clark has a spot on the list going forward, then you're probably better off actually giving him a chance to tag someone and see what he can actually do. So, look, I'm for it, but I just wish that we'd have a consistent approach to it so that if we decide that we are going to have a tagger, we roll with it throughout the season.
There are going to be some very angry posters on our board that you've just said the only role Dylan Clark has is as a tagger. Didn't you see his efforts as a small forward last year and the constant gloating that he'd improved his kicking, which made me chuckle at times.
Well, mate, if that's going to be considered improving kicking, it's a very low barrier to entry. The reality is Dylan Clark is competing with Darcy Parish, Andrew McGrath, Jai Caldwell, and that's not even to, look at Zach Merritt or Dylan Shield in that sort of centre bounce arrangement. And then you look at small forwards. Is he really going to push out McDonald, Tip and Woody? Is he going to push out Ned Cahill if we decide to push him back forward? Is he going to push out Will Snelling? When I say last chance saloon for Dylan Clark, I mean, this is really the only role that I could sort of identify him that he can make his own that isn't under existential threat by more talented players on our list.
Yeah, and look, I do agree. I was probably just having a little bit of fun at the expense of some people on our board there. But of course, we do this Sunday. We have Fremantle 110 at Etihad Stadium. Sorry, Marvel Stadium. I still call it Etihad. They're lucky I don't call it Telstra Dome.
Well, till they start to pay us sponsorship money, we'll call it whatever we want.
Are they not paying it the sponsorship money?
They're not sponsoring the BigFooty Essendon board podcast. Until they do, we'll call them whatever we want.
I thought we were going to get Munich Brauhaus to do it because we quite enjoy the beer and German food.
Well, I'll tell you what, if they want to get on board with a sponsorship and some free samples, then by all means, we'll give them the time of day. But alas, the hills aren't alive with the sound of music from them at the moment. So we'll wait until we hear from them.
So Beerfish, you are listening and you are obviously editing this as the producer of the show and then the man in the background. Can you just organise the sponsor for us next week so we can all enjoy the free beer and German food? And there is potential that you actually have no idea what we're talking about because you're obviously not Melbourne based. But if you could find our sponsor for us, we'd be much appreciative. But anyway, back to the Fremantle game. Just a quick shout out there. Fremantle's form this year has been patchy. They have had some solid wins. They did beat GWS earlier, but GWS were fairly rubbish early in the season. They beat Hawthorn, but, we should have beaten Hawthorn. They beat Adelaide, but, again, Adelaide are not great. They belted North Melbourne, but to be honest, the only side that's going to lose to North Melbourne this year is probably us against them the following Sunday. Other than that, they've been smacked by West Coast. Brisbane handled them pretty comfortably. Even Carlton put them away pretty easily. Melbourne, round one, shook off a few cobwebs, put them away. Is this a 50-50 game? Is this more likely to be a win for us, a loss for us? I mean, I think we should probably win. I'll certainly tip us, but as somebody else was saying, somebody else the other night was saying it's going to be a 8-goal win. I don't think I'm quite that confident yet.
Yeah, I don't know how you could be, to be honest. I don't think we've shown anywhere near enough consistency or ability yet to dominate a team. I mean, sure, we did it against St Kilda, but that was an exception as opposed to the rule. I mean, I think it's a 50-50 call, this one. I lean towards us purely because Fremantle will be doing a back-to-back road trip after playing in Brisbane the week before. But I think it's two pretty evenly placed teams, to be honest, in terms of where they are going for their premiership aspirations, the makeup of their list. The only difference being, obviously, that they have two absolute superstars in Nat Fyfe and David Mundy. So I don't know about you, Bonds, but have you seen a player at his age, at David Mundy's age, just excel to the level that he has?
Sean Burgoyne, maybe. But even then, I reckon Mundy's probably got him covered, especially since he's travelling from Perth usually every second week, but he's obviously travelling a little bit more at the moment due to COVID.
But I'd say the difference is Mundy's been the lead man, whereas Burgoyne was almost like the pinch hitter that you'd bring in late to close out a game. It's truly a phenomenal performance from Mundy.
Yeah, I mean, Burgoyne he was sort of Hodge, Lewis, Mitchell have gone through. They need a break. Let's throw Burgoyne in there. Whereas you're right, Mundy is still the main man. And no, I don't think anyone's rivaled him at his age for what he's still doing. If you're going to look at it, I suppose at a player in a different role, in a different position than Dustin Fletcher at the age Mundy was at was still a gun as well. But obviously two very different players.
So let me throw a question at you from before. We were speaking about Dylan Clark and do you throw a tiger at someone? Between Nat Fyfe and David Mundy, who are you tagging?
He's still got to tag Fyfe. And I'll admit right now I'm heavily biased because Nat Fyfe's probably my favourite non-Essendon player. He is just unbelievable. The fact that I think he's playing injured about 50% of the times is just ridiculous. I mean, if Nat Fyfe was ever fully fit and got a full run at it, I mean, we saw what he did when he won his Brownlow. So, I mean, for me, it's Fyfe, but Mundy's definitely got a shout as well, which is just ridiculous for his age.
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately for Fife, I don't think you can count his haircut as an injury, although others may disagree.
Well, just on Fife, he has kicked 2 goals 15 this year. Now, he did kick 1 goal 3 on the weekend against Brisbane. So the fact that he's kicked 2 goals 15 for the season makes me understand that he'll probably put in 4 or 5 straight against us just to really rub salt into the wound.
Well, as you said, he kicked one last week, so he's in goal-kicking form. So, watch out. It might be the, was it Nathan Gill special from all those years ago, back when Adelaide visited?
Yeah.
He's hoping we don't have to repeat there, and that Fife decides, he'll bring his kicking boots and kick straight, because we might be in a bit of trouble if he does that.
Now, we have touched on Fife and Mundy, but the other bloke that I think has been sensational for them this year, and he's their leading disposal getter, and that's Andrew Brayshaw. And I just had to double check that it was the right Brayshaw, and I wasn't quoting the Melbourne Brayshaw. But yeah, I mean, he's just been phenomenal ever since Gaff belted the Jesus out of him. So what do you think?
He reminds me
of pushing the other two as the player to watch at Fremantle?
I don't think you can go that far, to be honest. He reminds me a bit of Andrew McGrath in that he's very much a death by 1,000 cuts midfielder. Now, I think he's a great complement to star power like Fife and Mundy, but I just don't really see him being on that sort of A level of midfielder. Absolutely has the potential that he might get there one day, but at the moment, I don't think he's there. But by all means, it's been a solid start to the year for the kid, and I'd happily take him at Essendon.
I think there's a lot of clubs that would happily take him in their best 22, and it'll be interesting to see if Melbourne do go sniffing around at all, or maybe even Carlton. I mean, if Cripps goes back to WA, getting Brayshaw across, although if I was Fremantle, I'd be asking for more than just Cripps for Brayshaw at the moment, because Paddy is out of form. But it will be interesting to see what the future holds for Brayshaw, because they are Victorian-based boys, aren't they? They're not WA.
Yeah, and I think Adam Cherra as well is a similar situation where I think clubs will see themselves as a potential chance to pry him loose as well. And that's where that's one area where I see Fremantle very similar to us. Is they've got a great young core in that midfield of Sarong, Cherra, Brayshaw, that they can really optimistically look forward and say, we've got the pillars of successful midfield here. So that's one reason why I'm really excited for this weekend, just to see how these sort of young core players actually match up against each other, because I've got a feeling that'll be one of several high-quality matches that we'll see between these teams over the coming years.
The other thing I'm actually looking forward to is seeing how we go against a side that doesn't score as heavily against... It doesn't score as heavily as we do, and they're certainly better at defending than we are. If you look, Fremantle have scored 113 less points over 8 games, but at the same time they've actually conceded 106 less points over the same amount of games. So we will find it a little trickier to score this week. I will be interested to see if we manage to keep our scoring level up, and at the same time, we'll be very interested to see how our defence goes. If Fremantle come out and have their best game of the season and kick 23 goals, then I think we do really start needing to look at our backline as a concern.
This week could go a lot of different ways. I equally wouldn't be surprised if we sort of got a roll on and made it a pretty uncompetitive game fairly early on. But likewise, Fremantle have every chance to do the same to us. And definitely, I feel like, especially I think these not just this coming week, but next week against North Melbourne, is a real litmus test for our list in general, just to see really where we're at and if we are developing where we want to. So by all means, if we do let through a big score this week, then questions rightfully have to be asked whether we actually are improving on the defensive efforts that we want to see.
Now, we did have another topic that we were going to touch on, but I am just going to pivot slightly away from that discussion and move into a different area. I've just seen that Zach Merritt is close to agreeing on a contract. That's his thread title at the moment. Robbo has reported that. How much faith or how much weight do you put in Mark Robinson's mail when it comes to Essendon?
I think Mark Robinson, when it comes to Essendon, can be generally pretty reliable. If we're looking for the utmost, I know European soccer fans use tier 1, tier 2 when it comes to sources. I'd have probably Daniel Sherney from The Age. It's probably like the 1A when it comes to Essendon mail. But Mark Robinson has shown over the years that he does have good connections at Essendon, so it wouldn't surprise me. And he did have an interview with Zach Merritt just the previous week. So it wouldn't surprise me if he does have some sort of insight. Now, whether that does actually lead to Merritt signing anytime soon is another matter, but I definitely feel in a much better place about Merritt potentially signing than I did, say, maybe 6 to 8 weeks ago.
Who's more important, Zach Merritt or Darcy Parish?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
I mean, immediately you
At
go
the
Zach
moment,
Merritt, but Darcy
yeah.
Parish, he's younger and in just as good a form.
See, the age doesn't really bother me when it comes between a Merit and a Parish conversation because we're talking, what, 2 years? At the moment now, it's clearly Merit, but give me the rest of the year and potentially a little bit more of Darcy Parish performing at this current level, then I think that's a real conversation, especially if Parish is able to elevate his field kicking and decision making.
The other one, of course, is Jake Stringer. He's out of contract, and I think I read an article somewhere on our board today that he may be looking to leave, Slice and Dyson, sorry, did post it. It was in the Age that clubs are starting to poke their ears up. I'd be very surprised to see Stringer go.
Oh, likewise. I think this is very much just a little bit of a management leak to try and get Essendon to come to the table in regards to the salary expectations that Stringer's camp would have. I think, honestly, it's been a pretty fruitful relationship so far for both player and club, and I don't see any reason why anything will change anytime soon. Just more posturing at this point in the season.
And let's be honest, if we actually do sign Merritt, Parish and Stringer, it would be very nice for once to actually get all our key players re-signing and not walking out the door.
Oh, absolutely. It's been a while, hasn't it?
I mean, the only other player, I'm just trying to look at the list that I think it says Duckworth posted it, but that was in 2007, so I think Law's updating it in the contracts thread. Nick Bryan is out of contract. Is that it? When was he drafted? 2019.
So Nick Bryan was acquired as a result of the live trade with North Melbourne that got us Harry Jones.
Ah, right.
So he was a 2019 draftee, and obviously Essendon would have no inclination to moving on. But we might see a very similar situation to what we have with Sam Draper. And St Kilda put that 4-year offer before he even played a game. I mean, yeah. I did see rumbling somewhere about Gold Coast potentially being an interested party. So I think Nick Bryan has some decisions to make as to how he fits into this Essendon team with theoretically Sam Draper going forward.
And if I was Essendon, I'd be pointing to the Melbourne setup, which has Max Gawn and Luke Jackson rotating fairly well at the moment. I mean, Jackson's been in great form as a forward, but I certainly think that Bryan and Draper have that capability to rotate similar to what those guys do, albeit neither of them, well, I was going to say neither of them are at that level yet. Neither of them are at Maxie's level, but they're certainly both probably closer to Jackson's level. Oh, Draper, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it just comes down to ego, really. And is Nick Bryan willing to assume what would essentially be a number 2 ruck spot, unless obviously form dictates that he should be number 1. But in the end, he'll make a decision based upon how he feels he'll be able to fit into this team, and it's up to Essendon to be able to sell him for how you described it, the Melbourne dream.
Well, I will say, mate, I think that's going to do us for this evening. We're at 33 minutes, so I will call an end to the proceedings. Thank you very much for joining me this evening.
Oh, absolutely, mate. Anytime. My absolute pleasure.
Big thanks to Ethan for trying to get on and help. No big thanks to Jade. He can get stuffed for refusing to join us this evening. Next week, we are hoping to have Dos, but his manager has told me that the appearance fee will need to increase substantially before he'll even look at joining us for a 5-minute burst. So I have no idea how we'll get him on for half hour. But as always, if anybody wants to join, feel free to send a message through. I'll have a chat. There are now technical limitations. There are now requirements for Beerfish, so he's not busy for hours on end. So if I say no, don't get offended, but it may happen. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely evening.